Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 241 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris.
We are back together again. We've had lots of adventures. We can't wait to share them with you. We were just laughing because if you could look at our desk that we're sitting at, we have something like a total of 8 notebooks, 1 Kindle, 1 Kobo, 1 computer, 2 phones, 25 books. So we have a lot to talk about. Let's go. We have a couple thank yous.
Yes, we have thank yous to 2 women, each named Susan, who became patrons recently.
Thank you to both of you. We appreciate you so much.
And what a coincidence. I just visited my sister Susan. So Susans, thank you all.
Lots of Susans in the air. It's a good name. I like that name. And I have one very quick follow-up, which was last episode, on episode 240, I talked about watching a video conversation between the author Geraldine Brooks and Claire Massoud about Geraldine's memoir, Memorial Days. And when I put the show notes out with the episode, the video wasn't live, but it is live now. So if you check those show notes for episode 240, you can click on the link and watch that wonderful conversation.
So Emily, what are you currently reading?
I am reading The Wedding People by ALISON Espak. And this came to me in an envelope with The God of the Woods that Aunt Ellen sent to me. I've seen this book around a lot. It came out last year. As a matter of fact, this copy is a Book of the Month Club copy. It was very popular. I believe it was a Read with Jenna pick or one of those. It also won the Goodreads Choice Award for 2024 for fiction. Full disclosure, I don't love reading about weddings. I'm sorry. I don't love weddings. I know that makes me sound like such a curmudgeon. I have catered an epic shit ton of weddings, and I understand why people want to write novels about them because it is so interesting when you put 2 very disparate groups of people together because 2 people fall in love and now all these people are supposed to spend time together at a party. So I understand the compulsion to write about them. However, since Aunt Ellen sent it to me, we have similar reading tastes. I decided to try it, and I fell in love right away with this novel. It is about Alison, who has been experiencing a lot of infertility. She and her husband gave up. They realized they couldn't have children, and then their marriage crumbled, and they got divorced, and she's going through a really hard time and decides very frankly and openly that she wants to commit suicide. So she gets on a plane, books a hotel that she and her husband had talked about staying at in Newport, Rhode Island, which is a place Chris and I are familiar with, and arrives to discover that the entire hotel has actually been booked by a wedding group, but somehow she managed to get a room. So is immediately swept up into the activities of the wedding. She was just going to stay one night and commit suicide that night, does not, and the story takes off from there. There's a couple things I want to talk about it. One is that in the acknowledgments, Alison says, "I owe so much to Virginia Woolf, Charlotte Bronte, and all the other writers who have and continue to, as Woolf wrote, quote, cut the literary road for women and work to keep, quote, the path smooth." So right away when I read that, you know, longtime listeners, that I go to the acknowledgments right away, I thought, ooh, I might be in a little trouble because I haven't read much of either of those authors. And then the epigraph is, "It was awful," he cried, "awful, awful. Still, the sun was hot. Still, one got over things. Still, life had a way of adding day to day." And this is Virginia Woolf from Mrs. Dalloway. So there is a lot of Virginia Woolf in here, and Mrs. Dalloway I came to read about is about throwing an epic party, like a dinner party, I believe. I read my friend Chris's review of Mrs. Dalloway. So that did not get in my way at all. I want to say I'm enjoying the book. I am mostly listening to it, it turns out. The narrator is Helen Lasser, and she's really performing it, doing really fun voices for the different characters. Again, it's called The Wedding People by ALISON Espak. I'm enjoying it very much.
Well, I'm reading a biography, The Improbable Victoria Woodhull, Suffrage, Free Love, and the First Woman to Run for President. This is by Eden Collinsworth. It comes out September 2nd from Doubleday. So thanks to them and NetGalley for the advanced reader copy. I had heard of Victoria Woodhull before. You know, she did run for president, and I didn't know much about her. So when I saw this arc came up, I was like, oh, that's one I want to request. The story actually, or the biography, starts in 1894 when this woman who is from America brings this court case to England. She's in England. She's married to an Englishman at this point. And she brings this libel court case to England. She's suing the British Museum and in particular one of the archivists there for libel. And what I really like about the biography is that they're very short chapters, so it makes it really compulsively readable. And there are a huge cast of characters in this book, from Mark Twain to Karl Marx. I mean, anybody who is anybody in the 19th century seems to have been touched in some way by Victoria Woodhull or her family. Her parents were basically con artists in America who used two of their daughters, Victoria being one of them, as a way to make money. They pitched the two daughters as being spiritualists who could speak to the dead or get messages about the dead. And this is right around the time of the Civil War, when the spiritualist movement was really picking up speed, and so many people who had lost their sons or fathers, brothers, wanted to hear from them. Her parents are just awful. They're just seemingly awful, awful people. But the family always stayed together or came back together somehow. Victoria and her sister were really masterminds at manipulating people to get what they wanted. They became consultants on Wall Street. I can't think of the right word right now. Investing people's money and doing it for other women, doing it at a time when women couldn't even really have their own bank accounts or anything like that. They managed to finagle things so that they could. One of the women was lovers with Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was the most wealthy person in the world. He had more money than the U.S. government at the time. So they had really good backing for that. They had their own newspaper where they put out their own version of things. It's wild. I mean, the life that they lived, the life that Victoria lived was extremely wild. She had 3 husbands. She was into free love, which at the time meant anyone could express physical love with another person. Mainly we're talking men with women, women with men, from what I gather at this point. And then she decides to run for president at a time when women couldn't even vote. So right now I'm at the point where she is in England. They do get run out of America after being arrested a couple times because Comstock comes along with his need to control. Even the people who had puritanical leanings thought Comstock was a little bit too much. But they get arrested twice because of things he was able to enact, and now they're in England. And what I like about the biography, how she sets this up, is it starts with the archivist. You start with learning about him, a Mr. Garnett, who was 16 when he was hired by the British Museum, and how he rises to become the prominent person. And what happens is, because of this court case, he dives into learning more about her background. So it's almost like this biographer has taken the archives of this archivist to trace the history, biography of this woman. So it's one of those cool biographies where you learn a lot about the time period as well. There are a bunch of other biographies of Victoria Woodhull. She's a fascinating character. She used and manipulated people herself, sometimes quite above the board, sometimes not so much. So I can't wait. I think I'm at like the 80% mark maybe. So I can't wait to finish that up this evening. Again, that's The Improbable Victoria Woodhull by Eden Collinsworth. It is publishing on September 2nd.
Cool. Sounds great. I'm reading a little paperback called Hotel Silence, and this is in honor of Women in Translation Month. The gentleman caller and I picked this up in a little free library in Minnesota, right near his sister, and the little free library was filled with only books in translation, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm going to do my best to pronounce the author's name because she is Icelandic. Oyder Ava Olavsdóttir. And this is translated, as I said, from Icelandic by Brian Fitzgibbon. And I decided to take this with me on the train yesterday because I was in the middle of the wedding people, but it's a big hardcover. And I also thought it'd be kind of rude to listen to an audiobook next to The Gentleman Caller, because I did want to feel like we were riding the rails together. So I decided to pick this up. He's already finished it and really enjoyed it. And it too is about suicide. So I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Because the one thing about The Wedding People that I could see, even though it's been incredibly popular, that people might object to is that it's not at all making fun of suicide, but it is talking about it very openly in a way that some people might feel is crass. And so it's interesting. In Hotel Silence, it's, to me, one of those more classic stories where the person has an internal monologue of suicidal ideations that they're not sharing with anybody. So it was so interesting to be reading these books side by side. This one starts out with an interesting epigraph as well. The formation of a scar is a natural part of the biological process, which occurs when a lesion to the skin or other body tissue grows after an accident, illness, or surgery. Since the body is unable to create an exact replica of the damaged tissue, the fresh tissue grows with a new texture and properties that differ from the undamaged skin around it. The navel is our center or core, and by that we mean the center of the universe. It is a scar that no longer serves a purpose, which is so fascinating since it's such an important part of our growth, the belly button. And so then the novel takes off starting in May 31st, all italicized, that talks about this character trying to get a tattoo to cover up a multitude of scars. It's so interesting. And I had to remind myself as I was reading it, because I felt a little confused that it's translated, right? And there's that saying, some things are lost in translation. So I wonder what the novel is, just even physically what it looks like in the Icelandic, because there are all of these interstitials where the novelist breaks out with little pieces of poetry, I'm showing Chris, that there's no setup for. It's just really random. And then in the back, there are notes that talks about each of those pages and where those little things come from, like Nietzsche, and some of them I can't pronounce because they're Icelandic. I'm going to try Jonas Tharbjardsons. I have a friend whose son lives in Denmark, and he said the language when he first moved there sounded like people talking with marbles in their mouths, but he's now fluent, so he figured it out. Anyway, this author has won several awards. This is her third novel, and the writing is really beautiful and kind of quiet compared to The Wedding People, which is heavy on dialogue and really in your face. And it is talking about someone who seemingly has had maybe cancer and has survived cancer, and then goes to visit his mother who's in a nursing home, and his marriage has dissolved and he's feeling suicidal ideations, but does have people in his life. So I'm hoping that it doesn't end up in a bad way. Jim did read it and really liked it, and he said it kind of picked up speed as it went, so maybe it doesn't stay quiet. Beautiful novel so far if you're looking for something to read in translation. Hotel Silence. Oider Ava Oilavstöder. Chris, what did you just read?
I listened to an audiobook on my recent road trip from Illinois to Alabama. I was wondering what I was going to listen to. I was in the mood for nonfiction, and one of the books I do want to read soon is The Power Broker by Robert Caro. I'm not up for that right now. It's like, 900,000 pages. But I would like to think I'll read it within the next 12 months. I'm not putting that out there in stone. But that said, I read or listened to Robert Caro's Working, Researching, Interviewing, Writing. I know I had this book out from the library, and I did a heavy skim of it at one point. And I'm so glad I chose it as the audiobook to listen to. And he narrates, which is great. And I love his voice. He has that classic New York accent. He's an older gentleman now reading it. His voice is just so calming and relaxing. I love it when, you can tell he's a good conversationalist. You could tell he can tell a good story verbally, not just in writing. So it was a joy to listen to. I have a quote here. He says, "What I am trying to do is show not only how power works, but the effect of power on the powerless. How political power affects our lives every single day in ways we never think about. You know, that's what The Power Broker is about. Moses, the man who, you know, created so many highways and roads and bridges and parks in New York, and also destroyed many, and destroyed very many lives in the process of that. And then he has been writing his multi-volume books on President Johnson. And I've only read one of those so far, but excellent. So Working is about his time working. This book consists of different essays that some have been published before, some have not. He talks about that he does want to write a memoir about his overall research experience, because he feels like he has some good knowledge to impart on how to conduct research. So this is a little compilation and some new material towards that. And I watched a documentary about him and his editor, Robert Gottlieb. And I know I talked about it on the podcast called Turn Every Page, The Adventures of Robert Caro and Robert Gottlieb. I'm sorry, I didn't look up what episode that was. But that turn every page is advice that Caro got as a young man, assuming his first research reporter role. Turn every page, assume nothing, turn every goddamn page, is what his editor told him. And it sounds like from the story he tells in that early chapter, he was a natural researcher, an investigative reporter. Like, it just came naturally to him to dig into these papers and to talk with people about what happened and how did it look and what was on the walls and what was somebody's body language, basically. These are not his words, but like, he'll interview people multiple times and ask them the same questions. And he says, people get mad at me because they're like, come on, I've already told you this like multiple times. And he's like, no, but like, what was going on? And he said, you know, over time, people remember different things, or they come to understand a situation differently or something. So he gets these fantastic bits of information and historical documentation from the research that he does to tell amazing stories of historical people and situations. It's a great book. It's short, and I kind of am recommending it as a little warm-up to The Power Broker. Or if you've read The Power Broker, you would probably be very interested in reading or listening to Work. He talks about how initially, you know, as a reporter, he was used to like cranking stories out, you know, same day kind of thing, same hour even. And he was known as being a very fast writer. Like, one of his jobs was to take phone calls coming in from other reporters who were on the scene and type up an article as he's listening to them. So he was known as being very fast. So when he decides to write his first book, he thinks, oh, it'll take a year. Well, then it's 2 years, and then it's 3 and 4. And he's getting kind of embarrassed about this because his friends are like, oh, you're still writing that book, huh? And they're all in the reporting world. A lot of them, they don't really understand what it's like to do a biography on somebody as huge as Moses, with the guy also threatening that he will not give anybody a contract if they talk to Caro as he's researching this initially. But finally, he gets in at the New York Public Library into one of the research rooms where they reserve a desk for somebody who's working on a serious book. And he finds himself surrounded by other biographers and historians and, you know, novelists who are doing like research, you know, using the resources of the library to write their books. And talking with some of these people, they ask like, oh, how long have you been working on the book? And he'll say 4 years. And they're like, oh, that's nothing. You know, I've been working on my biography of Washington for like 8 years or things like that. So he starts to understand he's in a different genre. He's around people who understand what he's trying to do. And I really appreciated that, because I think you can't compare genres. You know, I mean, you can if you want to. It can be fun. It can be a fun exercise to do that. But I think really different types of books take different types of time. And then there's also the life circumstances. I enjoyed it so much. He is a slow speaker, so it was great for driving through the cornfields of Illinois. I took some back roads for a while, and that was a great pace. I imagine some people might want to speed it up a little bit. At the very end, they have an interview with him from the Paris Review. And so they have somebody reading the questions, and he answers in that way. So wonderful book. And, you know, he's writing his last one, and one of the things he mentions is that a lot of reporters are saying to him, like, oh, yeah, you're going to finish that last one? It's kind of like, do the math. Like, how long has each of his books taken? And he's in his 80s now. So it's kind of like, well, leave him alone and let him write, you know? And another thing, he talks about his wife, Ina, a lot, who has been his research assistant, his only research assistant during this entire, lifelong process of writing these biographies. And I Googled her this morning, and she's a writer in her own right. She's a medieval specialist. She's written several books. One of them deals with trains in Paris or France. And one of the blurbs was that they'd rather ride the rails with her, than any other writer. So he doesn't mention that she's a writer. So I don't know if that was her saying, don't put me in there in that way, but it's really amazing. And all the pictures I've seen of him researching tend to be him by himself. And I think it would be great to have some photos of them together digging through the archives. So lovely book. Can't recommend it enough. Working. The subtitle is Researching, Interviewing, Writing by Robert Caro.
I finished a book called Until Alison by Kate Russo. This is Kate's sophomore novel. She is the daughter of Richard Russo, which she probably gets sick of people saying that about her, but he is a revered writer in his own right. And when Kate was in college, at Colby College in Maine, she wrote for the school newspaper. And a fellow student named Dawn Rossignol, I think is how you pronounce her name, was picked up in her car and murdered. That was a real true thing that happened in Kate's life. And she was working for the school newspaper at the time. So suddenly she was thrust into this situation where she wasn't reporting on typical college happenings. She became a journalist reporting on a murder and was also a student worried about her own safety because they didn't solve the murder right away. So in the back, she writes about the fact that this is not based in truth on that event, but that event did have a huge impact on her life as a person and as a writer. This book is about a college situation where two people come together who grew up together through middle school. And they were friends at one point, and then what often happens in middle school, they separated because one of the women became bullied by most of the other students. She just was picked on in a large part because she was wealthy. And this was one of those small town communities in Maine where there were people on one side of the track and people on another. And it was also at a point in time when Facebook was just starting. So there was that online social media bullying taking place as well. The two characters, Rachel Nardelli is a reporter on her college newspaper, and then Allison Petrucci is the young woman who had been bullied in middle school. So she ended up going to a private high school, and here they are then reunited in college, and they have this shared past. And Allison, very early in the novel, so this isn't a huge spoiler, is at a party with Rachel. She walks out the door with a man that nobody knows and is murdered, or is found dead, I should say. And so even though it's not based, she makes it very clear in the acknowledgments it's not based on that story. It is obviously informed by that story, and it is a lot about being bullied and also being a party to bullying. It's billed and marketed as a thriller. I would say that was a disservice to this book. I didn't feel like it was a thriller at all. I felt like it was a study in what it is like to be a middle school student, because it does go back and forth in time. And then also, how do you admit participating, not necessarily being the bully, but certainly participating in bullying, which is so unpleasant and has such terrible consequences, as you can see in this novel. So I will say that I enjoyed her writing very much. The story was a little bit tough to get through. And again, I was kind of waiting for the thriller part, and that never really showed up for me. Until Alison, Kate Russo.
Interesting. That marketing does a lot on how you read a novel, and then whether you dig into it or put it aside because it wasn't fulfilling what you were looking for at the time. But it sounds like you were willing to stick with it, even though it didn't have those thrillery elements.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to know what happened. I wanted to understand. I found when it would go back in time to their middle school years, I mean, frankly, it's partly because I don't want to go back to the middle school years, so I have trouble reading about that. But I found those scenes lagged, and it was more interesting to me when she was in college and she was writing for the school newspaper and trying to figure out how to report on this situation that was happening. And also, it was palpable, that feeling of, you know, here we are walking around a school campus and we don't know if one of our fellow classmates was responsible for this happening. Mm-hmm. And that part I felt like was very vivid, and I felt that I was really in the story with her. But in the parts back in middle school, I felt like those dragged a little bit, and the parents' reaction to what was happening and the bullying, it dragged a little bit, I think, for me. There is a content warning, there is some sexual assault material in here. So if that is a sensitive area for you, I would not read this book.
So we both read our Q3 read-along book, The Upstairs House by Julia Fine. We also read The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which we kind of looked at as like a companion read. And we did have a fantastic conversation with a group of listeners. Thank you to everyone who participated.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, you know, well, I guess we really determined during the read-along, it's really about postpartum psychosis. And during our read-along conversation, people were very vulnerable, and we really appreciated it. You know, it's tough subject matter, but really important to read about. So thank you to everyone who participated in that conversation and shared your stories and your insights. It was really meaningful to us. To start with, Chris, should we give just a very quick summary of what the book's about?
Sure, yeah. The Upstairs House is about a woman who has just had her first baby, a little girl. Her name is Megan. The woman is Megan, and her child is Claire. There is a husband in the picture, but he is often off on business.
Very soon after she gives birth, like a week after she gives birth, he goes on his first business trip.
Yeah, because it's an important meeting with an important client.
Yes. And so she's, you know, not sleeping, not eating, taking care of this baby, and begins to hear things, experience things happening in her house.
Right, yeah. So they're in a condo in Chicago. They recently moved there. They haven't been there for years and years. I don't know how long they've been there, but they moved there because she's pregnant. And that's the decision they made. She wanted to be in the city.
He wanted to be in the suburbs.
Right. So they have this condo in the city, and she starts hearing things. She starts hearing pounding that no one else seems to be hearing. So she goes up the fire escape and sees a door on the side of the building that also other people can't see. And it kind of goes from there. The woman who is building a house up above her condo is the famed children's author, Margaret Wise Brown, author of Goodnight Moon. It's probably one of her most famous, and The Runaway Bunny. And she's up there in her 1940s, 50s clothing.
With her lover, Michael Strange,
who was a poet in her day, and they had a very unbalanced relationship in a lot of ways. Michael was much older than Margaret and more famous initially, but then her star starts falling a bit as Margaret's is on the rise. But, you know, Michael is wealthy. She's married to a wealthy man. She's had multiple husbands and is kind of a snobby elitist person, is the vibe that I got about her. And she's riffing on Margaret to do something more than just write children's books, writing those kiddie books. So their relationship is kind of entwined throughout the experience that Megan is having. And we won't get too spoilery on this because there were some tense moments of spoilerishness that we don't want to ruin for anyone. One of the things I said in the conversation is that I don't tend to, one, read a ton of books about pregnant women. And two, I'm usually not all that concerned about the baby in the book because usually the baby is the baby that is just there. I was really worried about this baby. And I liked that it wasn't heavy-handed by the author at all. And we should say the author is Julia Fine. I don't know if we mentioned her name yet. She does a fabulous job of keeping the focus on the mom, I thought. And the baby is there. Megan also has a sister who's in the picture sometimes. But that kid, I was so worried about her.
Yeah, I mean, she paints a really good picture of the problem with postpartum psychosis, that there is a child at stake and caring for that child doesn't stop just because someone is not doing well mentally.
Yeah, I mean, her own life is endangered. And, that's the thing, like, she's a good liar. She's a liar by nature. I think it's safe to say, she's not really in love with her husband. She chose him because he was a safe option, and her friends, who are non-existent in the book, agree that he's fine, whereas her past boyfriends kind of encourage some of her borderline unhealthy behavior. Let's just put it at that. She has challenges way before the baby comes along, and the husband is one of those guys who's not seeing anything. He's not noticing things at all.
Yeah. That part was really painful for me. And the freedom he had to come and go and just not care for her and for this baby was really painful to see. And the other thing that's happening throughout the novel is that she was writing a dissertation. She had been working on a dissertation about Margaret Wise Brown. So there are these sections in the book where she, because she happens to be visiting with them upstairs, is learning more about them and is writing more about these people in the vein of writing her dissertation, but it's not really shaping up the way she wants it to. What I really enjoyed about the book was the form, and some of that was the way that it went back and forth in time with these other characters, Margaret Wise Brown and Michael Strange, and also how she was defining language, like what the term ghost means, what the term haunt means. And that part I really appreciated. I thought Julia Fine's writing was really spectacular.
Yeah, I enjoyed her writing very much. And I enjoyed both of the, I guess you can't call it two storylines because they're all the same story in Megan's mind. I appreciated both of them. Not everybody did in our conversation that we had. Some people didn't really think that the Margaret/Michael worked all that well. Other people really enjoyed learning about their relationship and their time period because, here they are, they're two women at a time when men could still have their wives admitted or condemned, I guess you could say, to, they're not called mental health institutions back then, but they could have their wives institutionalized. He could have had her arrested, medicated. It was a time period very different from our own for now.
Yeah. One thing that people said, there are some interviews with Julia Fine about this novel, and she talked about her hope for this book was that people would do a lot of Googling and a lot of their own research. Several of our listeners had actually read biographies of Margaret Wise Brown, so they did know about her already and know some of the intricacies of her life.
Yeah, that was a really cool part about her author's note, that she wrote this in part for people to get curious about the historical women fictionalized in this book. And other women, too, like Anne Carroll Moore, who was the head of the children's services at the New York Public Library. Her dates were 1871 to 1961, and apparently she despised Goodnight Moon to the point where it was not included in the NYPL's collections for a very long time. But I wanted to learn more about her a little bit. And then there's also a line in the book, and this is on page 88, when the narrator is saying, one of my cataloging jobs at the New York Public Library had been a video of a dance performance in the 1980s, a Twyla Tharp piece, blah, blah, blah. But I'm thinking, like, I don't know that the New York Public Library has non-librarian catalogers. I don't know that much about their structure. But usually, like, cataloging is a job that requires a library degree. Maybe she has a library degree. We don't know. She's currently working on a PhD in history, is her thing.
Interesting.
So that made me want to also then look up their hiring practices at the NYPL, at least back in the 80s.
Yes.
It was a performance from the 80s that she was doing. She was cataloging. But yeah, a lot of really interesting book history is included within this book, which I appreciated. And then the words were fascinating.
Yeah, and she also really set us up in the very beginning that the novel would be about, because she's talking about her daughter Clara seeing something, and then she sees a balloon, and they tell her she didn't see the balloon, essentially. And there's a quote from her mother saying, "The beginning of your life as a woman, being told you couldn't have seen what you're sure that you saw." And so that kind of is a thread through the whole novel, even to the end. The ending, there's an epilogue that people had very different understandings of what it meant, which I love a book like that.
Yeah, the ending was really a good discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole book was really fascinating. One of the things I really appreciated, and I could see how this would spark an idea like this, is that Margaret Wise Brown has a body of work and Michael does not. Like, Michael is a forgotten poet. Her work is no longer read or anything. So she's disembodied in a way that Margaret's not. And like, when you think about ghosts and just legacy in general, lots to think about there.
Yeah, for sure.
So creative. I thought it was a very creative story.
Yeah, and one of the other things that people talked about as far as this being one of our quarterly read-along choices is that they were hoping that the book would be more ghosty. And really, none of our books have been overtly ghosty with like a haunting ghost that's floating around in, white. Like some of these short stories we're reading have had some kind of like haunts where people walk down the hall and feel something brushing them. And I feel like it was a really good choice. I'm sounding defensive. I don't mean to sound that way. But just that I think it was a study in what you can do with the idea of ghosts in a story. And so I really appreciated it in that way. And I feel like The Good House was a different story because that was more of a possession type of a ghost story.
Yes, that's quite true. And then The Haunting of Hill House was kind of, there was nothing there, but there was a lot of things there. Right. Yeah. The thing about ghosts, I think, in 2025 is that I think a lot of the stories that you and I have been looking at and trying to find something for quarterly read-alongs is that so many of them are billed as thrillers because somebody is haunted by their past. And so it's been challenging, a good challenge, a fun challenge, to look at all these books and find something that might be a little bit more than just somebody being haunted by their past. And I think this was a really good, like, you don't know at the end. Like, it could go a bunch of different ways, and different readers had different takes on that, which is, I think, the hallmark of a really well-written novel, that you can end it and people don't know.
Right.
Like, you can make an argument for whatever argument you want to make.
Yeah. And the ending was was a lot of the reason why at the end you're like, what did actually happen? And I thought that was so brilliantly done.
And who did it happen to?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So really, I enjoyed it a lot. I know early on I was kind of like, oh boy. But that quickly went the way the winds, and I had a really good experience reading it. And then you and I both reread The Yellow Wallpaper. We were talking about it before we had the Zoom conversation with listeners, that we both sometimes confuse it with The Awakening by Kate Chopin, because we both read both short stories in college or, some kind of class in the past. But of course, The Yellow Wallpaper is by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and it is a story that still inspires writers today.
Including Julia Fine, who wrote The Upstairs House. And it is about a woman who's had a baby and she's experiencing postpartum depression. And so she is given the rest cure, which means she is to go lay in bed and really not challenge herself by doing anything, even picking up a pen. One of the things I wrote down is they were afraid of her journaling. She wasn't to journal, which most of us who are journalers know, like, that's actually a way to get through these sort of challenging times in your life. But they were afraid what would happen if she got to write about this experience.
Yes. And then the story was first published in 1892, and not keeping a journal. I mean, this is a kind of, it's really not that much of a sidebar, but at least when I went through Marine Corps boot camp, you were not allowed to keep a journal either.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think like two different reasons why, probably, but just that it's almost like the other book we read with the rest cure.
The Garden.
The Garden, right? Where it's just like no input, whatever. Like, you're supposed to just sleep and relax.
Right. And the difference with The Garden is they were the babies were still in utero. In the Yellow Wallpaper and in the upstairs house, they've had the babies and they're having some challenges after having the baby.
Right. Yeah. And so this rest cure was a famous cure that was created to, initially help women with conditions. And as one of the listeners in the conversation said, women were given the rest cure, whereas men were told to go west and be masculine and do manly things and bulk up your body and be physical and active and eat and all of those things.
Right.
So, the gender stereotypes and the separate spheres was very real in the medical profession.
Right. And one of the things that I thought was a through line in both the Yellow Wallpaper and the upstairs house was loneliness. And so to give someone who's experiencing postpartum depression and being at home with a baby, I can tell you is one of the loneliest experiences of your life. And at the same time, someone saying to you, isn't this the best thing that's ever happened to you? And so in the Yellow Wallpaper, they say, oh, now you've had this experiencing and you're really struggling. So go lay in a bed by yourself in a room with yellow wallpaper and, just rest.
And the thing about the room, and we won't give too many spoilers about this, even though it's an older story. If you haven't read it, we highly recommend it. There's something off about the room. Mm-hmm. You can tell it's been used for things in the past. And so she has this depression that does morph into postpartum psychosis. And it is an intense story. It's written in the first person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so readable. Like if you have had experiences with 19th century stories that you think are not very readable because of the language, this is not one of those.
And it's 15 pages.
Yeah.
It reads really quickly. And, we've been reading these short stories in the Penguin Book of Ghost Stories to see common themes. And one of the things I thought was really interesting that I didn't notice at all the first time I read this years ago is the second paragraph is that they were going to find this summer home to escape to, and it was a colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. So that's so familiar in these stories. Like they go live in a house that nobody's been living in for some reason.
Right. I know. And the thing is, like, her husband is a doctor as well. And so he doesn't listen to her. Mm-hmm. He is not seeing, just like the husband in the upstairs house, is not seeing actually what's in front of him. He is not listening to his wife talk about things. And he says, this is a quote from the story. He says, no one but myself can help me out of it, that I must use my will and self-control and not let any silly fancies run away with me. So therefore, she can't be reading, can't be writing letters. And this whole issue of will and self-control, those ideas really impinged upon mental health and finding cures because you can't will yourself out of mental health conditions. So you see that at play here too. They're very paternalistic. The husband calls her little girl. So, you can just see that she is being caged like an animal and she's really not getting help. Her treatment's actually making her worse.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And I listened to it, and I'll put a link in the show notes to this audiobook. It's through Hoopla, through the library. And also it included the essay that Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote called Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper. The entire audiobook, I want to say, was 40 minutes or something. And so it has the reading of the short story and then that essay. And she says she wrote it because she had been given the rest cure. It did not work for her. And so she wanted to write about why it didn't work. And her hope was that it wouldn't scare people to death, but that it would help people understand that this is the wrong approach to take. And eventually, psychiatrists did read it and stopped prescribing the rest cure.
I mean, can you imagine? I don't know that I'd even last a day just being in a room with nothing.
No, I would go insane. Yeah. And I would start seeing things in the wallpaper.
Yeah. I was really happy to read both of these together. I read the novel before rereading the story.
And I did the opposite. I read the Yellow Wallpaper and then read the story.
Yeah, and I think it works both ways. Because if you read the short story first, you could see how Julia Fine is vibing off of it, and then the same thing, doing it backwards. You can then kind of see like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I think reading the story first for me just set the stage of that whole feeling of being in a room and your mind starting to wander in ways that aren't necessarily healthy. And so it did help me step into the novel. But I agree with you, either way would work just fine.
Yeah. Another recent book that really hat tips to the Yellow Wallpaper is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, who uses that in ways that I didn't quite remember. Like wallpaper is a thing within that novel, but mushrooms are also a thing. And I forgot about mushrooms in the Yellow Wallpaper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody that read along with us. We are not going to announce Q4 this episode. We will announce it next episode.
Yeah, so stay tuned, and we hope you'll read along with us again.
Indeed. So I also read a novel called Wreck by Catherine Newman. This book comes out on October 28th from Harper. Thank you for the advanced reader copy. She is also the author of the novel Sandwich, which was in my top 10 last year. Just like Sandwich, the title, Wreck, has multiple meanings. In this case, there is an actual car wreck, a car train wreck that takes place. She's a bit of a wreck, Rocky, the main character, because she has an illness they're having trouble diagnosing. And there's some kind of family dynamics that are a little bit of a wreck also, which is a little bit of a loaded term there. But just, like when things are happening with your kids and you're trying to figure it out and you can kind of feel like it's all a wreck. So I was really impressed by that because Sandwich was another one of those titles that had multiple meanings. So this continues with the characters that are in Sandwich. Unlike Sandwich, which took place over the course of a week where they were at a rental cottage in Sandwich, Massachusetts, this one, Rocky and her husband are back home, and their daughter is currently living at home, and their son has gone off to New York and is working a job. And Rocky and Nick, her husband, are struggling because she is trying to figure out this rando illness where she's getting weird rashes along her body. And a lot of the novel is those scenes where you're talking to your doctor's office who's supposed to be setting you up with a specialist, and they say they faxed the information and they haven't faxed the information. Like those scenes were making my heart race because who hasn't been on the phone trying to figure that stuff out and get tests scheduled? At the same time, there's a tragic accident that takes place in the hometown where a young man is in a car accident with a train. And he happens to be someone that grew up with the character that is the son. And so, as I said, again, the title reflects the context of the story. I also felt wrecked after reading it, I should say, because of this struggle with her health and the challenge of being a mother of adult children, which I feel like she did really well in Sandwich. In Sandwich, there was also a through line about pregnancies that didn't take, that she was mourning. That isn't happening here. Here, I think it's more her experiencing a health crisis and then also having some complexity with her son that I do not want to spoil around the car wreck that takes place. There was, interestingly, a synchronicity with the Upstairs House and Margaret Weiss Brown that I thought I would read. And this is about that concept of having children out in the world and how it feels to be a parent who has grown children out in the world. To have a child is to have your heart go walking around outside your body for the rest of your life, so the saying goes. Not a pink bubble of a heart, but the bloodied organ itself, dragged through the gutter behind a team of wild horses, returned to you in tatters, if at all. The urge to flee is strong. I picture Runaway Bunny, the mama rabbit promising to follow her baby wherever it goes, only the opposite. If this bedroom window opened and a ladder appeared, I would climb down and away. I would become a trout, a crocus. I would become a rock in the mountain high above, and my children would become mountain climbers to climb to me, but I would still be a rock. It was such an interesting take, I feel like, on that famous saying of, having children is like your heart walking around. I just loved that. And The Runaway Bunny, of course, is a Margaret Weiss Brown book. So I thought that was interesting that I was reading both at the same time, and there she was. Catherine Newman's not for everyone. I had a conversation with one of my friends that read Sandwich and felt like she didn't enjoy the familiarity she has with her children and the way they talk to each other. That's actually something I really enjoy about her writing, and that it just seems like she's really open with her children about the struggles of life and being a grown-up. And there's a lot about having anxiety in here, which the main character, Rocky, has, as does her daughter. And they take medication to help them with that and really talk about what it feels like to be a person in the world with anxiety. I loved this book so much. I love her writing. I love Catherine Newman as a person. She has a Substack that I will put in the show notes that's really fun to read as well, where she talks about what she's cooking and what she's reading. Wreck by Catherine Newman.
And she writes short novels, which a lot of people appreciate.
Yes, this one came in at 213 pages with the acknowledgments.
Well, we also read another short story together. This is our next story from the Penguin Book of Ghost Stories, from Elizabeth Gaskell to Ambrose Bierce, edited by Michael, we should say. And we read The Monkey's Paw. This is a story by W.W.Jacobs that was published in 1902. What'd you think, Emily?
I really liked it. I listened to it first on audio, and then I read it. And as I was listening to it the first time, I said to myself, ooh, be careful what you wish for. And then I said, self, where did that saying come from? And I Googled it, and guess where it came from?
Where?
The Monkey's Paw.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Very cool.
And now we'll tell you why.
Or you'll have to read it to find out yourself.
Maybe so.
Maybe, yeah.
Yes.
Because there's a line in here. This is a sentence from the story. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives and that those who interfered with it did so to their sorrow.
Such a great line. It's a short story. It's in 3 parts or chapters. As it isn't called chapters in the book so much, but in the audiobook, they did definitely refer to it as chapters.
They're like little sections. Yeah. I think nowadays, if this were published today as a news story, they'd use asterisks or something maybe. They use the Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3.
I have to say, one of the things that caught me off guard was the first sentence, which kind of didn't make sense. And I had to listen to it twice, and then I had to read it because it says, without, comma, the night was cold and wet, comma, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. I was like, that doesn't make sense. It's like double negatives or something. I don't know. It didn't make sense. But anyway, I got over myself.
Yeah, a little old-fashioned way of saying that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it opens with a father and a son playing chess, and the mother is knitting by the fire, and someone comes to the house.
An old friend who takes the train to come and visit. He's an English man who's been in India a lot. He's an old soldier. The colonel, I think, is his name, and he has a monkey's paw.
Sergeant Major Morris, I think, was his name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he has a monkey's paw upon which you can make 3 wishes.
And he says that the man who had it before him, his 3rd wish was to die. And
foreshadowing.
Yes. And the colonel is not very, or what is he, Sergeant Major? What did you just say?
Sergeant Major Morris.
Yeah, the Sergeant Major Morris is not a very happy man. Mm-hmm. And he attempts to fling it in the fire, and one of our protagonists digs it out of the fire.
Yeah. And then maybe proceeds to make some wishes.
Yeah, and I did not see things coming. Did you? Like the next day?
Oh, no. I mean, but I mean, 2/3 of the way through, I was like, where's the ghost? Like, this is not a ghost story. And then, yeah, I did not see it coming.
It's a brutal little short story.
It is.
And I enjoyed it very much. I thought the writing, other than that first sentence, was very clear. And I felt the emotion.
Definitely.
Yeah, of the characters. So for being so short, it did have a good effect. It wasn't just one of those brainy stories.
Yeah.
It had a bit of a heart tug as well.
Yeah. And just like the last bio, reminder, this is that book that has the bios of the authors at the end. I love the editor and how he's writing these bios, because this one says, William Waymark Jacobs, also known as W.W. Jacobs, was a Londoner growing up by the docks in Wapping in a state of teetering respectability. It's such a great line.
Yes.
Or description, I should say, I guess.
Yeah, and he goes on to say that Jacobs specialized in comic tales, stories of sailors, and supernatural fictions. The Monkey's Paw is by far the best known of all his tales and has become the basis for a stage play, several films, radio plays, television adaptations, and an opera.
The miracle of the short story, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, when Laura and I watch a lot of old films, and so many of them are based on short stories or sometimes a play or something like that. But, you know, when people rail against adaptations today, like, can't people come up with original screenplays? Well, they really didn't used to either,
right,
you know,
exactly.
like it used to be, movies used to be based on a lot of short stories. So I want to track down one of these film adaptations maybe and just see, because I do feel like I knew the story after I closed the book. It felt really familiar, but maybe it is just that whole be careful what you wish for situation. And then, what happens?
Yeah, and I mean, how many times do you... I mean, I think I even said to Jim, because I was reading this on the train, I said to him, if someone granted you one wish, what would it be? I mean, it's such a loaded question, right? And so how many times have you played that game with people? Or if you were given 3 wishes, what would they be, you know? And so often one of the wishes becomes a wish based on the other wishes, right? Which is a little bit of a spoiler.
Right, exactly, yeah. And, you know, the Wheel of Fortune, you know, it's an ancient concept and you can't change it. Like the Wheel of Fortune is always spinning and sometimes you're up and sometimes you're down and, you know, trying to change things, changing fate, it just can get you into more trouble.
Yes,
right?
Indeed. And I have a joke with one of my friends that, you know, if you believe in the concept of manifesting, which I do, to be very specific in your manifesting sometimes. Because sometimes you manifest things and you're like, oh, that isn't exactly what I meant. But it'll have to do, I guess. So I thought of that when I was reading this one.
Yeah.
Again, it was called The Monkey's Paw by W.W.Jacobs. And what are we queuing up next, Chris?
Well, next up, I'm really excited to read this one. When I've been Googling around looking at ghost stories that are recommended, this is one of them that comes up. It's by Mary Wilkins Freeman, The Wind in the Rose Bush.
And I think it's a little bit longer than the last 2 we've read.
I think it is too. And we're going to be discussing it on episode 242. And if you would like to read along with us and send any comments or questions or reactions, do so by September 2nd, please.
Well, I finished another novel called FONSECA by Jessica Francis Kane. And this is a fictionalized story of the author Penelope Fitzgerald and her trip to Mexico from England in 1952. She has been summoned by the Delaney sisters. Her husband has returned from the war, a changed man. They, as a family, are struggling. He is really struggling with alcoholism. They already have 2 children, and she is pregnant, 3 months pregnant with another, and is then summoned by these sisters and makes a trip to Mexico, pregnant, taking her son, Valpy, leaving her daughter, Tina, with, I think, her mother-in-law. I might have that wrong. She leaves with a family member. Penelope Fitzgerald and her husband were running a literary journal for real during this time, and it is really struggling financially. And so they are summoned by these Delaney sisters who have a fortune. They're in Mexico. The fortune is from a silver mine that the family had been running. And they think that Valpy, the son, could be one of the heirs to this fortune. So she shows up amongst some other people that show up hoping to be able to participate in this fortune. So there are a cast of different characters that are there. And it's about this time that Fitzgerald spends there with her son. And what's interesting in the novel is there are then these letters that pop up here and there that are, you don't know who they're being written to, but they are from Penelope Fitzgerald's children. And they are answering questions about this time in Mexico and about Penelope Fitzgerald. The writing is very literary. There were times where I found my mind wandering a little because of that, so I really had to focus reading this novel. And seeing Jessica talk about it really helped me. I was about midway through reading it when I saw her in conversation, which I will talk about in Biblio Adventures. I enjoyed it very much. And if you are a fan of Penelope Fitzgerald, I've only ever read her novel, The Bookshop, because it was turned into a movie and I wanted to read the novel first, and I did enjoy it. She, too, is a master of the short novel. But if you are a fan of Penelope Fitzgerald, I would think that this is a must-read for you. Again, it's called FONSECA by Jessica Francis Kane. So we had some serious Biblio adventures.
We did. We had some together. We had some individually.
We had some in separate states.
Yes.
So should we talk about our trip to the New York Public Library, which we took the day after we recorded the last episode?
Yeah. We went to the big house there on Fifth Avenue. We took the train in, had a wonderful ride, got to read a little bit. And then you worked in the main reading room, the Rose Room, which is so gorgeous.
Yeah, it has the most beautiful ceiling. We will post a picture of that. It's just a beautiful place. And Chris went off to the archives to do some work, which is a door at the end of the Rose Room that she enters. I can't go in. It's top secret. Top secret clearance, librarian clearance.
Well, no, anybody could use it. You just have to make appointments.
Yes.
Yeah. Back in the day, though, you would need to have a referral from a professor, at least one, saying that you were worthy enough to access information. I mean, that was kind of archives in general. And nowadays, archives really want people to come and use their holdings, whether you're a fan of a certain writer or artist or a scholar or a distant family member, like anyone can come. You just do have to make an appointment. Because right now, the big hot thing there at the New York Public Library is the archives of
Joan Didion.
Yeah. They have a lot of people waiting to see them and access different parts of their archives. It has a bunch of boxes. I think it's like over 200 boxes or something. So it's a big archive. But yeah, and the archivist said it was a really busy summer. Summer's usually their busiest time. But this summer in particular, there were a lot of fans who wanted to come and access certain boxes and scholars. And when I was there, there were two important people consulting that archive.
It was very funny because we had about an hour before Chris went in to the archives. And I said, because she's been going every Thursday this summer for a project she's working on. And I said, have you ever seen anyone famous in there? And she said, no, I don't think so. And then no sooner than 15 minutes after she walks in the door, I get a text telling me there indeed are some famous people in here today looking at things. So that was really fun. We had a good laugh about that.
It was funny because I don't know that I ever look around. Like I'm usually focused on what I'm doing and I don't really pay attention to other people because, there are lines of desks and each person has their own desk and there's a little lamp for each desk. And so most people are just looking at what they're looking at. So
the difference between me and Chris, I'd be dropping my pen every few minutes just so I could peer over someone's shoulder to see who it is and what they're doing.
Yeah. So that was a good day, productive day.
Really fun. And then the next adventure we took was by car.
Well, no, before that, we did stop at the Drama Bookshop.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
That visit. Yeah. So after our time at the archive and library, we went to see a friend's play. And then we stopped at the Drama Bookshop, which neither of us had visited before. Such a cool shop. Really well designed on the inside. We'll post a video that shows like this cool book sculpture that runs throughout the building. But really nicely curated as well. I mean, if you were looking for a play, this is the bookshop to go to. You could order from them online. They have such an amazing collection of plays from long dead playwrights to people who are writing today. Like my wife, Laura Toma, they have her play Magpie there.
Which is so fun to see.
Yeah, totally. But then they also have other sections. Like they do have a good fiction section, nonfiction. They have a lot of books about the craft of writing, not just playwriting either, but other types of writing.
And they have a lot of biography of people who are in theater and in that world.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people hanging out reading. They have plush seating around the area, a couple of tables.
A nice coffee shop.
Yeah.
Which was closing just as we got there.
Right. Yeah. So we got there like maybe 6:37. So
yeah, right before closing.
Super fun to see that. And that was a shop. It's been around for a very long time at different locations, but it was facing closure. And Lin-Manuel Miranda and some other investors got together to keep it going. So thank you to them for saving a New York institution.
Indeed. And then our next Biblio adventure was by car. We hopped in the car bright and early and drove to Boston to visit the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. We have been talking about the biography Chasing Beauty by Natalie Dykstra, which is about Isabella Stewart Gardner's life. So that was part of the impetus for going to the museum. We also knew of the museum because we spent time at Simmons College when Chris was in library school, which was literally right next door to the museum. Right next door.
And one day we were even walking around a little bit, and I don't remember, somebody said to us, out of nowhere, apparently, you should go see the museum. You can get to it right through this little hallway. And we're like, oh my God, we're going to, but we didn't have time that day. I'm so glad we finally made it because it was awe-inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, I have not stopped thinking about it since we went. Just the building itself is beautiful. Isabella Stewart Gardner really became a student of art throughout her adult life and had started to collect art. She and her husband, Jack, started to collect art. And when they finally purchased a Rembrandt self-portrait, they realized that their art collection was getting pretty serious and thought that maybe they would like to open it to the public in some way to share these masterpieces they had.
Yeah, they really wanted to help educate Americans and show Americans the beauty that was possible through artistic expression. And unfortunately, Jack died pretty young, and Isabella was already wealthy and became much wealthier through marriage, and so she built this building. One of her favorite cities is Venice, and she built this building. It's a 4-story building that on the inside has this gorgeous garden atrium area that looks like a villa in Italy, right?
Yeah.
Like the way the arches are, like you feel like you're in Venice. You feel like you're in a building in Venice, but one that's facing inside.
Right.
Instead of outside.
She wanted to put the gardens inside instead of outside.
Yeah.
And the ceiling is glass. So the sunlight, the entire day, there's dappled sunlight that hits in different ways.
Yeah.
And there are these open, arching windows from floor to floor to floor. So you're in there looking at the atrium and you look up and you see people looking out from the 3rd floor.
Yeah.
It was stunning. There are orchids and all sorts of manner of flora and fauna. I could have sat and just looked at the garden all day. But there are rooms upon rooms, floors upon floors of spectacular art.
Well, so when you first walk in, it's a new addition that's there that's very modern, that handles all the things that a modern museum needs, from ticket sales to coat check. There's a gift store. There's a lovely cafe. There's some exhibit space and classrooms, a fantastic auditorium. And then you walk across to the original museum. And when you walk, like we both just gasped. I mean, it was stunning to walk in, and on the left, you see this gorgeous garden and this atrium that goes up and up and up. And then on the right, a gorgeous painting.
Yeah.
Like a human-sized painting that takes up this whole side of a room, and then your eye just keeps going.
And it kind of feels indoor-outdoor because it is, even though you're indoor and you think like, oh my God, there's this incredible art that kind of feels like it's outside in a garden.
Yes. I was just like, wow, curating that has to be a challenge.
Yes.
Because you know how painting and wood and canvas responds to humidity and everything. They do change the gardens out like seasonally, so it'll be great to go back at another time of the year to see this. But what's fascinating is that Isabella didn't arrange the art in like, this is the time period, or this is the country.
Or the artist.
Or the artist, right? Like, so things were kind of mixed together in a way that makes great sense. And there are themes, you know, some rooms are more thematic than others. And there's no placards, which is very unusual for a museum because she wanted people to experience the art.
There is an audio tour you can do. So you saw lots of people walking around with their phones and standing in front of things. You can also do that QR code thing with your phone that brings up information and had really cool maps of each of the pieces in the room.
Yeah, so you can definitely identify things. And there were several times that we did that, and probably at least once in every room, like, oh my God, what is that? Is that? Yes, it is.
Yes.
You know?
There's definitely a Dante theme for those of you who read Dante with Chris or followed along with that or are fans of Dante. Dante played an important role in Isabella's life, which you learn more about as you're reading Chasing Beauty. There are Dante important and inspired things in the museum as well.
Yeah, and then there are even portraits of some of her good buddies like Henry James.
Right, exactly. And writings from them. There are a few cupboards, is that what or cases maybe be the better word, that have ephemera from her, friendships with these famous people.
Right. And she thinks one of the things I got a kick out of, she thought she was a descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yes.
So there's a display related to that. And some of Isabella's, or Belle, they called her Belle, right?
Yeah, they called her Belle.
Her collections with that.
And she collected different kinds of art. I mean, there were rooms with tapestries hanging from the walls. There were beautiful pieces of furniture, statues. Yeah.
Yeah, paintings, sculptures, pulpits. Like there was some cast iron pulpit in the medieval room, I think that was in. Really fantastic. And from different countries. She went to Asia. She has a strong Asian collection, medieval, contemporary to her, painters. Gorgeous. Yeah. I mean, we did stop for lunch. We had a wonderful lunch at their cafe.
So delicious. But highly recommend.
Yeah, we got there. I think we were in the museum proper at 11:30. Mm-hmm. They opened 11.
Yeah.
Is that right? And then we left as they were telling people to leave.
Yeah.
Is when we left.
And we couldn't believe it because that morning we had texted saying, "So, is there anything else you want to do while you're in Boston?" I think we should just do the museum and come home. And we did the museum all day. Yeah. It was amazing. And I desperately want to go back.
Yeah. And it was neat. In one of the rooms, there's a curator working on the ceiling on artwork that was on the beams in the ceiling. She was up there on scaffolding. And there was also a theft that happened there.
Very famous, unsolved.
Still ongoing investigation. Some paintings were cut out of their frames, and they leave those frames in place to where those paintings were.
And part of the reason they do that is because in Isabella's will, she made it clear that she did not want any of the ways that she had laid out the artwork to change. So even though those paintings were stolen, they wanted to show that that is where she had intended for that piece of artwork to be and didn't want to replace it with something else.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a fantastic day. We highly recommend, if you find yourself in the Boston area, to take a stop at that museum.
Yeah, 100%. And we are going to have the pleasure of Chasing Beauty's author.
Natalie will be speaking with us in October.
Yeah, Natalie Dykstra. She'll be here in October as a guest. So if you'd like to read the biography, now would be a good time. Feel free to email us with any questions you'd like us to ask her.
Yes, we would love that.
I had a Zoom conversation with the Margaret Fuller readers. We are past the halfway point now with reading that Library of America collected writings of Margaret Fuller. Had a really fantastic discussion. People are at different places in the reading and have different headspaces and everything. Such a great conversation. Everyone is really interested in learning more about Margaret Fuller, and talking with one another really helps clarify some things, give context to some pieces, and you can see the changes in Margaret Fuller's writing. Some of her earlier writings were kind of hard to read, but then there she is writing for a newspaper in New York City, and her writing gets a lot more, it gets more brisk. It gets, not brisk, is that the right word? It becomes,
brisk to me means at a faster pace and clearer, more concise.
Yeah, clear, maybe more concise a bit than some of her other that seemed a little convoluted. So that was a great conversation. We have one more coming up in September, and I think I'm so grateful to everyone who's participating in that. It's really enriching my understanding of Margaret Fuller and encouraging me to keep reading, and that it's really, I think, important to read our foremothers. Yeah. She really helped shape the suffragist movement and women's rights in America and understanding of gender relations.
I'm so glad that you have a group of people reading along. That's great.
Yeah.
I attended an event at R.J. Julia's bookstore in Madison with Jessica Francis Kane, the author of FONSECA, in conversation with
Janice Nomura, who was the author of The Doctor's Blackwell,
which was one of our read-alongs the year we read nonfiction. And they, it turns out, are really good friends. They were college roommates. They've remained friends ever since. I have to admit, when they said that at the very beginning, I thought, uh-oh. Because sometimes people can get really familiar and inside baseball, and then you can't follow the conversation. Not true here. You know, we spoke to Janice Nomura. She was so engaging to talk to. She was incredibly good conversationalist with Jessica and had her questions. She had them typed out and in one of those plastic sleeves. She was ready to frickin' go when they sat down. And what they did was both of them read, which was really interesting. So Jessica read the opening chapter, and then Janice read one of those letters. And then they could talk about why the novel took that form. But first, I want to tell you, Jessica told a story of how she became enamored of Penelope Fitzgerald. It was 1999. She was living in London with her husband. They had moved there for his work, and her plan was to be writing. Instead, her writing was not going very well. She was very sad, felt depressed, lonely, missed her family. One day, her husband comes home with the novel Offshore, which was one of Penelope Fitzgerald's novels. She had never heard of her. She read the novel and fell in love with Penelope Fitzgerald's writing and started to read all of her books and has been a student of Penelope Fitzgerald ever since. And Jessica has written a couple other books, but this idea of writing about something about Penelope Fitzgerald was always there for her. And then she decided to write about this kind of mysterious time in Penelope Fitzgerald's life where she went to Mexico. It's a fact that she went there, but there's nothing in her really hard and fast in her journals about it. And there's a biography by Hermione Lee where, you know, if anybody was going to talk about this time, Hermione Lee would have, but there isn't much information about it. So that's why Jessica decided she would fictionalize a story about Penelope Fitzgerald's time there and imagine it. And so she told a couple really interesting stories. One is she starts to write this novel, and then word gets out about it because she has written enough to sell it. And so you know how they make those announcements, like, you know, Jessica Francis Kane, novel such and such has been purchased by such and such. Well, the heirs of Penelope Fitzgerald get wind of this. Her daughter Tina's husband is the executor. And gets in touch, and Jessica got so nervous and writes a letter, and they start corresponding with each other. And they actually, turns out they're very excited about her writing it. But Jessica kind of got cold feet. So talking about Robert Caro taking a long time to write, this novel ends up taking her like 6 years to write because she now has to figure out how to do it and how they're going to participate in it. And she starts this correspondence where they're answering her questions, and those are actually the letters that are in this novel.
Wow, that's so cool.
It's so fascinating the way she did it. But she also told this story where she is a novelist. Janice Nomura is a biographer, nonfiction writer who has spent plenty of time in archives. Jessica has not spent time in archives. Interestingly, even though Penelope Fitzgerald is an English woman, a lot of her archives are at the Ransom Center in Texas. So there she is. She's on day one. She's sitting down. All these boxes are coming to her. As you're aware, Chris, you've spent lots of times in archives. And suddenly someone taps her on the shoulder, and she turns around, and there's Hermione Lee, the woman who wrote the biography on Penelope Fitzgerald.
Very cool.
Janice has, of course, heard this story before because they're very good friends, but she gasped. She's like, I would be like, what the hell are you researching this woman for that I wrote a biography about? You know, right away, Janice is feeling like, you know, like that would be her reaction. But Hermione was just curious. She said, I have to tell you, I'm here working on a project, but I keep seeing the Penelope Fitzgerald boxes coming out, and I have to know, what are you working on? And Jessica said, I'm writing about the Mexico years. And she said, Hermione Lee just shook her head and said, that makes sense. And she was there researching Tom Stoppard, which is another biography that she's written. For the record, everybody, Penelope Fitzgerald believed very much in magical realism, and there is a ghost in FONSECA. So if you want to check off a box on your ghost bingo card, this would be a good novel to read. Excellent. It was a fantastic event.
I'm sad that I missed that one.
Yeah. Well, duty calls. We can't do everything.
No, unfortunately not. But sometimes we can live off of each other in
Yes.
that way. Live vicariously, I should say. Not as a parasite. Well, I had a bit of a trip. I flew to Chicago where I picked up my mom's car and drove it down to Alabama for her. It's where she lives now. And it was also her 86th birthday. So we had a bit of a celebration. Along the way, I did take some side roads, some state routes, I should say, you know, and I followed the signs to the library, to the Piper City Public Library, which is really cool. I didn't get to go inside. They'd closed just like within a half hour before I got there. It was about 5:30 when I arrived. But it's in an old storefront. I think it was originally a harness shop, you know, for horses, oxen and stuff. And then for a while it was a shoe repair store. And then it eventually sat empty for a while until, I'm not sure if the library then was the next thing to go into it. And we'll put a link to the library's page in the show notes, and you can visit their About page to see how the library was formed and how it's changed over the years. But that was neat to see. And then I also stopped at a bookstore, and we put on Instagram a photo of me with a print in the background of a dog sitting on some books, and said, Chris is at a bookstore between Illinois and Alabama. Can you guess which bookstore it is? Of course, everyone knew it was Parnassus.
Because the dog is sitting on a stack of books with the spines, and it has the names of the books. So.
And it's Sparky. So, And that print hangs in their bathroom.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. But it was a really great visit. I'm so happy I got to stop. Nashville was on the way, so I made a little detour, and I had lunch at Chipotle, and it's in a strip mall area. And sitting there at Chipotle, I could see Parnassus, and I watched people streaming in and out. There's also a paint store on the other side, and there's a running shop. But most of the activity was going into Parnassus, which is really cool to see. A word of caution, it's a very small parking lot, and people are very aggressive and fast in there, so be careful.
Got to get your books.
Got to get that. It was a lovely visit. I didn't have much time because I did want to get down to my mom and my sisters. But really wonderfully curated bookstore. When you first walk in, there was a big display of a new book. It's Bel Canto, the annotated edition.
Yeah.
So they had a big display of that. Along the whole left side is fiction, and it's various genres. And then on the right-hand side was a lot of nonfiction, like the cookbooks were there and sports books, U.S. history biography. I spent a lot of time in that section. And then in between, there are a lot of tables and a sitting area to hang out. Great sidelines, of course.
And a lot of dogs, right?
Yeah, there was one dog in the shop that day. I didn't catch the dog's name, and the dog was a poodle, kind of a mid-sized poodle, who was kind of like not sure of people really. So the dog would kind of run up and kind of look at you like, hey, I want a pet, but then like walk away. Like, I don't think so. I did get a butt sniff at one point. So I felt like, okay, I'm in. Yeah, cute dog. I took a picture and we posted that on our socials as well. You can check out the dog on Instagram or Facebook, which are currently the only socials that we're doing. You know, they had a kids section as well, but they also had a really nice coffee table book section. You know, the oversized books that are usually quite heavy and expensive. And I don't see that very much anymore other than during the holiday season, because those are often good holiday books. But that was cool to see. I spent some time browsing there. So wonderful shop, very busy, very friendly. I was there around lunchtime, so it was kind of cool to see the shop so busy. I imagine on weekends it must do really good business. It's in a big retail shopping area, so I imagine people who go to get their needs met definitely get it met there at Parnassus. They do special orders, so a lot of people were coming in. Some guy came in, he said, I'm here to pick up a book for my wife. I don't need to know what it is. And the young man who handed it to him said, here it is. She's already paid for it. He's like, okay. And then he asked about another book if they had it.
Okay.
So
I thought he was like, oh, this is her, like,
yeah, no,
my shopping addict wife. I'm here every day to pick up another book.
No, he was then asking about a book for himself.
Okay.
So it wasn't
That's
like
hilarious.
that. But yeah, super friendly place. And it was fun to see a bookshop dog there walking around and people love seeing dogs for the most part. I know some people are allergic and some people are afraid of dogs, but it's fun to see cats and dogs in bookshops. They add a different energy to the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you got there. I was so envious. I got a nice picture from Chris of her sitting at Chipotle. It was like her view over her Chipotle food out the window to Parnassus. And I just so glad she was there. So sad I wasn't there.
Yeah. It was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I'm up for going for a longer visit. So,
yes.
Anytime.
A road trip. Well, I got to spend yesterday in the city with Aunt Ellen. And we went to see a play called Call Me Izzy, starring Jean Smart. It is a one-woman show. She has not been on Broadway for 25 years. And unfortunately, Jean Smart had a terrible accident in July. There's been a very specific run of this show, very limited engagement. And she was hailing a cab and she tripped over one of those barriers in the road and broke her kneecap.
Oh.
Yeah, so you could really see that with the play. The play was canceled for a couple of weeks and they extended it, which is why Ellen called me, because she's now back in the city, and said, they extended it. Do you want to see it? But you could really see, I especially thought of Laura, because we just got to enjoy Laura's play and see how much work it is to stage it and everything. And you could really see how they were having her sit and propping up her knee as she delivered her lines, and they made it look just like it should be, but I'm sure that's not how it was originally staged.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, when we walked into the lobby, there was this little free library that said Call Me Izzy on the side and books inside of it. And I thought, that is so cool, but kind of odd, but I didn't think twice about it. We got pictures, so we'll put those on social media. But then the play is about a woman who is born and raised in this small town, Mansfield, Louisiana. It's 1989. Her name's Isabel. She's married to a man. She got married at 17, living in this trailer park. And when she was in school, her teacher said, "You really are a writer. You've got talent." And very soon after she gets married, her teacher comes knocking on her trailer with a letter of recommendation and says, "Please, please apply to college." But that is not how her life goes. And she ends up in a very abusive marriage. And most of the play takes place with her in her bathroom writing on toilet paper with an eyebrow pencil.
Wow.
Because her husband does not want her to be writing. It is so good. And Jean Smart plays multiple characters, and not in a way where she gets up and then she has a man's shirt on or something like that. But just her voice changes a little bit, where she's talking like her husband or talking like her neighbor. At one point, she does get a library card, and it's life-changing for her. So as the play started, I was like, oh, now I understand the little free library in the lobby. It was written by a man named Jamie Wax, and it is based on his aunt that had a very similar life. And it took him 35 years to write this play, in part because he had one of those situations where he lost his hard drive. It burned. Gosh. And he lost the whole play. Ugh. And then years later, he ran into a friend that had known about the play that he had shared with him and said, "I have a copy of that play on one of my hard drives. I keep all of my hard drives."
Wow.
So that's how he got back into writing it.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's
really
a great story.
Interesting. I loved it. Really so glad we got to see it. Fun evening. You were missed.
Yeah. Another thing I missed. But yeah, I'm so glad you got to see that. Sounds like a real powerful story.
Yeah, really was.
Nice.
Yeah. And then one that had a slightly ambiguous ending, and 4 of us went, and it was divided down the middle. 2 of us thought something happened, and the other 2 thought something else happened. Isn't that amazing?
It is. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. I love an ambiguous ending. Some people cannot stand them.
For me, it depends on the story. And also, I think when I was younger, I wanted to know. And I think as I've gotten older, it's been more of a curiosity. Or sometimes if I'm stubborn, I'll just think oh, that's what happened.
That's okay.
But, you know what I mean? Yeah. So, well, when I was in Alabama, my sister and mom took me on a tour down there. Huntsville is where my sister and brother-in-law and now my mom live. And I'd been to Alabama before, but the southern part, Huntsville is up in the mountains, which I was surprised how similar it looks to Northwest Connecticut. but it's all part of the Appalachian mountain chain, so that makes sense, right? Really beautiful area. And so my sister drove us around the historic district, and I saw a little free library, a couple, so I did take a photo with one. I'll post that. But the historic district, they have, kind of similar to here in Connecticut, they have signs out front saying what year the house was built and by whom, but it's more like a stake in the ground kind of thing than here we have little placards on the house usually, I guess. So that was really cool. And my sister specifically knew I'd be interested in seeing some of the historical markers that they have. There's one for the Huntsville Female Seminary, which was built in 1831. And these are cool. They're rather large historical markers, and they're double-sided. So make sure you read both sides if you go down there. I know some places the historical marker could be the same on both sides. So turn every page, as Robert Caro was advised. Look at both sides. So the Huntsville Female Seminary, what was interesting is the historic marker said that the founders of that institution were disciples of Catherine Beecher Stowe and her Hartford Female Seminary here in Connecticut, which was a fun connection to see. And that started in 1831. I don't know if I gave the date of that.
Wait, so Catherine Beecher Stowe, is she related to Harriet Beecher Stowe?
Yes, that's her sister. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and Harriet was also, I don't remember now if Harriet taught a little bit at the Hartford Female Seminary. I believe she did. And then she was instrumental with education in the West.
Right.
What was considered the West back then anyway. There was also a sign for a woman named Dr. Francis Cannabis Roberts. Her home was down there. Her dates were 1916 to 2000. And then there was one for a woman named Virginia Tunstall Clay Clopton. And this was a placard out front of a home. And the placard itself is about the Huntsville's pioneer suffragists. So Virginia was one. She worked with her sister as an editor of the Huntsville Democrat, which apparently published a lot of things in support of women's suffrage. And it lists some other women suffragists in the area: Alberta Chapman Taylor, Julia Chapman Clanton, Ellalie Chapman Humes. And I think it's really cool to say their names out loud in 2025 and to thank them for the work that they did in helping us get the vote and knowing about our foremothers again. I think it's super important. So that was a really fun thing to see. I just love old architecture in general. It's so beautiful. So I look forward to visiting Huntsville more in the future and getting to see more of their literary history.
Yeah, any listeners out there that know the area, send Chris, well, just email us at bookcougars@gmail.com if there's bookstores or libraries that you enjoy.
Yeah, we didn't have a chance. I mean, I was down there. I got there on Tuesday. I left Thursday morning. It was a really quick trip. My mom's birthday was Wednesday. There is a big Huntsville main library that it's pretty close. And then satellite locations too throughout the city. And my sister thought that a new independent bookstore had opened up in the area. So definitely something to research. But yeah, listeners, if you are familiar with North Alabama, we'd love your recommendations.
So what about any upcoming jaunts, Chris?
Well, one that I just put on the books this morning because thanks to the magic of social media, I learned that possibly the first horror-specific bookstore is opening in New York City. This is the Twisted Spine in Brooklyn. Their grand opening is September 6th to 7th. I doubt we're going to make it for the grand opening, but it's definitely going on our list of things to do in New York City.
Yeah. So fun.
They have social media presence, so check them out. They've been posting some photos of their, getting the shop ready and some of their stock and stuff like that. I think it's going to be a great bookstore to keep in touch with.
Yeah, I think it's fun how these genre-specific bookstores are opening up. And I don't know if it's partly they're seeing the success of the romance bookstores, or if it's just, people have a particular passion and they want to have a bookstore that features that.
I know, there used to be a lot of mystery-focused bookstores, and there still are. And I know there have been women-focused bookstores and now romance and horror. So it'll be interesting to see how they do.
Yeah. Speaking of bookstores, we have a joint jaunt planned for next week to go back to the Kindred Thoughts bookstore in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Chris talked about that in episode 240. That was one that we always wanted to go to together. So we are going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be a fun day.
Yeah.
And maybe have some good food somewhere along the way.
Yeah, and we might try to spy a library or some such, as they say. I am also signed up for an event on September 12th. I can't believe we're talking about September, but there you have it. Through Bank Square Books in Mystic/Stonington, Connecticut, with Laura Ehrlich talking about her new novel, Bind Me Tighter Still, which has one of the best covers. It's like a mermaid hanging. She refers to them as sirens, which is more of an ancient term for a mermaid. She wrote the book Animal Wife, which was a set of short stories that won the Red Hen Press Fiction Award. And I heard her in conversation a while ago and talked about that. So this is a Friday night from 6 to 7 at night and should be fun. I just found her so compelling, so I'm excited that she has a new novel, which is also published by Red Hen Press.
What about upcoming reads? I imagine you'll be reading that one, but anything else?
Yes, I need to get my hands on a copy of that because it isn't out yet. I have two that were inspired by our listeners. One was, I believe, from our Patreon reading salon where we talked about short novels. And this is called The Rarest Fruit by Gael Bellum. And it is a fictionalized account of the young boy who was enslaved. His name was Edmund Albius, who helped to solve the mystery and revolutionize the way that they propagated vanilla beans or orchids. Vanilla bean is from the orchid plant.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
He was a young botanist. Yeah. And she talked about it. I think this was Anne. I am so sorry if I have the wrong person who talked about this, but I cook a lot with vanilla. I love the vanilla bean. And when she talked about it, I thought I have to get my hands on a copy of that. And it has a great cover that shows an orchid plant with a vanilla bean hanging from it. Yeah, what was happening was they had no problem growing the plant, but they couldn't get it to mate with itself because they needed a male and a female, or to figure out a way to spread the seeds. Mm-hmm. And he figured it out.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then I also have Mary let me know about this memoir because she knows that I'm really enjoying memoir called Cat and Bird by Kyoko Mori. And it's a memoir and essays about her life told through her relationships with her cats.
It's a cute cover.
Yeah, it's a very cute cover. It's a sweet little small book from Belt Publishing. And thank you to Belt Publishing for sending us this copy. What about you, my friend?
Well, I will be digging into Chasing Beauty in September. Again, that's by Natalie Dykstra. And it's going to go well with a new, well, I'm not even sure if this is a new reading month or not, but it is called Framed in September, and it is about reading and learning about art. I heard about this from Hannah's Books. She's a booktuber, and she's going to be co-hosting this with 3 other booktubers. And so the reading challenge has 2 hashtags, Framed in September or Art Readathon. They're using both of those. So the gist of it is to, 1, read a book about art, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. 2, experience art. So visit a museum, go to a concert, see a ballet, look at the architecture in your neighborhood, or maybe focus on the art in your home, something like that. And then to create art yourself or talk about art that has a special meaning to you, which I thought was really cool to have, you know, the book aspect and then what the book is about and kind of expanding that. So again, that's Framed in September. There's another book that just crossed my path too recently that came out in July 15th. It's called The Club, Where American Women Artists Found Refuge in Belle Epoque, Paris. And that is by Jennifer Dessel. I'm not sure if I will read it, but I'm definitely going to hunt down a copy and give it a good browse. So yeah, art in September.
Maybe we'll do a video over on BookTube about it.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I have some artish books I'd love to talk about.
Yeah, now that fall is almost here. I mean, I was shocked to get back into town and see some trees with leaves that are already changing. I was like, wow. Yeah, we'll be getting back to our weekly YouTube videos now that the school is back in session here around the corner.
I was just saying to the gentleman caller this morning, I love September. I love back to school. I loved it as a kid. I loved it as a mom. Like, okay, time for everyone to get back on our regularly scheduled lives. I know some people don't want to give up summer. I love summer, but I was always glad to get back into the routine of life. I felt like the cooler temperatures, I had more energy and just was ready to get back into routine.
Same. So, yeah. Oh, I'm ready for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So look for more videos from us and let us know what you're reading. We always love to hear about that on social media, through our email. Look at me. I've got these 2 books queued up that listeners told me about. So we love hearing from you.
All right, everybody. We wish you lots of happy reading. Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.